The culture of a particular congregation is always a top-down thing. It is imperative that everyone in a congregation understands the direction that the leadership are taking the congregation. That everyone is on the same page, that everyone understands these are our goals. This is who we are. Not just short-term, medium-term, long-term goals, but this is what our goal is as a culture, who we are, how we operate. It doesn't happen from the bottom up. We've talked about that some. It doesn't happen from just a handful of motivated, ministry-oriented people who are pushing forward in their own personal ministries, and the eldership is sort of just existing and not really going a particular direction or setting the tone for where things should go and how things should be. It has to start from the top. Because from the top down, what you have is the model that God designed, the shepherd model. And it goes back to Hebrews 13:17. The understanding that we are supposed to submit to those who are entrusted with our spiritual care. They watch out for our souls, losing sleep over us. And we are not to give them grief, but to help facilitate that. Because when we facilitate that, rather than give them friction in the culture that they're setting, that's when it's profitable to us. That's when the paradigm or the model that God has set for the church to be spiritually taken care of, that's when it is realized. That's what Hebrews 13:17 is about, at least partly what it's about. As I'm approaching the rest of what you would call the qualifications of elders or the essential qualities of elders, this has been a very difficult thing to not stretch out into another 8 lessons. And if it has to be, then so be it. Lord willing, it will be beneficial to us. This morning, I'll just go ahead and show you the one we're going to look at this morning. This morning, we're going to look at hospitality, or how one of the qualities, essential qualities or qualifications, is that they must be hospitable. Someone who's to be a shepherd of the flock is to be hospitable. And this speaks directly to what kind of culture or cultural direction they are setting or leading on. I wanted to couple this together with the part that talks about not being greedy for money or motivated by money or a lover of money or something like that. Because both of these, if we're honest about it, hospitality and someone's relationship with money, both of them have to do with their focus. Whether or not they're focused in self-serving or focused in people-serving. And one of the fundamentals of the shepherd model is a death to self. It is a, as we looked at last week, it is a mastery of self that enables someone to serve others. Everything okay, Matt? Okay, good. All right. Oh, he's look, I'm hot. I've been sweating since I woke up this morning. But someone's going to complain. Somebody's going to complain every time we touch these. But that's okay. If you're hot, raise your hand. I'm just kidding. If you're cold, don't say anything. Thank you. That is the best part of the lesson right there. It's turning the air down a little bit. Someone told me this week about a preacher who was habitually preaching lessons that were like 85 minutes long. And I thought, boy, I'm an amateur at this, right? One of the things I struggle with is biting off more than I can chew, or trying to fit in more than I really have any business doing. And so I'm just going to look at this one and not both of them. I want to give enough time, and hopefully we'll be done a little earlier than usual. But just to recap, as we've done each time, I want us to look at these essential qualities within the light of how do they enable someone to be a shepherd and to fulfill the job description, so to speak, that we find in Psalm 23 and in John 10. The duties are as follows per these chapters here. Takes care of the needs of the sheep, gives food and water so they feed, bringing restoration and renewal, leads down the path of righteousness, gives comfort and protection when the enemy is trying to kill them, heals sickness and diseases, and blesses them with the abundant life, which we have. Also the parallel in John 10, where the shepherd is the door of protection. They talk to the sheep. They know the sheep. They're known by their sheep. That's key for the idea of hospitality. They save the sheep. They bless with the abundant life. And, of course, they're sacrificial. And we narrow this down to a couple of umbrella terms. You might say, you might call them our soul care, caring for the needs of someone. And that could be physical needs, but primarily spiritual needs. And then spiritual formation is the idea of equipping someone to be spiritually what they need to be faithful to God, to grow in their spiritual maturity, and to follow the pattern of 2 Timothy 2:2 of teaching people and making disciples and teaching them to make disciples as well. The perpetual discipling paradigm we have there. And so this model is important. These duties are important, and we need to look at each of these qualifications of elders, these things that make elders eligible, or actually just make them shepherds. We need to look at them within the light of not just the what of these are the particular items, but the why. Why has God in His divine mind given us these particular stipulations that make a man eligible to be a shepherd of a local congregation? How has God seen these things fitting to accomplish these duties? We find these, at least this one, I had to edit this, in 1 Timothy 3, verse 2, and Titus 1:8, just says must be hospitable. The term hospitality, I've done some lessons where I've discussed this a little bit. It's an interesting word. It's a compound word. And the two words are words that have carried over into the English language to an extent. The word is philoxenon, which is a compound word. The first word is philia or phileo, which is the idea of love or a friendship type of love. The term xenon or xenon is where you might have heard the term xenophobia, which is the fear of someone who's a stranger. It's the idea of a stranger. It's someone that you don't know. And so quite literally the term hospitality just means that you love or care for, you care about someone who is a stranger. This friendliness to strangers is another way you might think of it. And so a person is not hospitable unless they actually are lovers of people, unless they actually want to spend time with people. And that has everything to do with setting what is the culture of a congregation. You know, what is it like when we have people who are new that come through the doors? Or what's it like when we meet somebody in the grocery store and start having a conversation with them? What kind of way of doing things? That's another idea or another definition of culture. What's the way that we do things around here? Are we in the habit of, is it the way we do things that we are automatically loving and receptive of people and catering to people and interested in their needs, interested in who they really are, not just a handshake, a slap on the back? Because let me tell you, one of the worst things that can ever happen to someone is that they come to church and shake hands with people and leave. That's one of the worst things that could ever happen. Because in no way, shape, or form do you there are people, there are people that sneak out of this place. I don't even know their names. Much less do I have any idea what's going on in their life. And if so, if we're in the habit of being very quick to sneak away from each other, and it's not just a matter of how quickly you leave an assembly, it's about the culture of purposing to actually spend time with each other. That's what being hospitable is about as far as a cultural shift in a place. Intimacy is key, because only in an intimate connection is shepherding, and in particular, the caring of a soul, the opportunities to form within someone the spiritual character and foundation that they need. Only within intimate connections where there is a shared knowledge. That's where you go back. You go back here to John 10. Knowing the sheep and being known by the sheep. It's a two-way street. One of the things that we mentioned and discussed in the meeting that we had is this past week is that we are those who are in any sort of a leadership position, and guess what? Anybody can be a leader if they choose to be. We're talking about everyone who sees that they can offer some sort of care to some other person. That we are to purpose ourselves, especially at assembly times, to be available for people. And I want all of you to know that those of us who are sort of lingering behind, and look, I know that we are in a weird time where we're not supposed to shake hands, or even though I shake people's hands all the time, and even we're not supposed to hug people, even though like I'm really going to be able to stop Bonnie from giving me a hug. It's, look, there are some things that are more important than other things. And if you're so terrified of getting a virus and not taking care of your spiritual health, when there are people who want to help you and are available to help you, then you're making poor decisions. Your priorities are out of order. And so if you are extricating yourself from situations that can be spiritually nourishing to you because, to be quite frank, you've watched CNN too much, then you've got your priorities flipped upside down. We cannot let Satan use this ridiculous situation anymore to hinder our connections with each other. It is through our connections that we are able to aid each other in the spiritual battles that we're going through. I know of so many people in this room who, when they are made known of a particular need of any kind, one of the things that they say is, "Thank you for letting us know." There are so many things and so many people who are in need of something, and we just don't know about it. But I step off my soapbox and just stand here in the pulpit. In Luke chapter 10, we find Jesus talking about the Samaritan who was called the Good Samaritan for this reason. He saw a stranger who was in need, and he was able to aid this man, and he poured his love out into this man with no expectation of being loved in return. That is a beautiful picture of what hospitality is. It's this loving of people, even people that you don't know, especially people that you don't know, and loving them without the expectation of love in return. That's the way God loves us. In Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, starting verse 46, "For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." There's something to be said for loving people that you don't know. And sometimes it's easier to love people that you don't know, right? Because people that you do know, you know them well enough that they drive you nuts, right? And so sometimes it's more difficult to love them. And within the context of 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1, this stipulation of hospitality has everything to do with, the nurturing, the equipping, the connecting with those who are in the immediate vicinity of the shepherds. When you go to 1 Peter chapter 5, he says, shepherd the flock which is among you. And so hospitality, while it is about loving people that you don't know and you don't expect anything in return, as a stipulation for shepherds, this has everything to do with wanting to share life with, being in the habit of sharing life with people for whom you have been charged with their spiritual well-being. And so it means bringing people into your life so that you can take care of them. Hospitality is important, right? One of the first things you think of is it's important because it's bringing people into your home. But I want us to think about this idea of hospitality as even grander than that. But it definitely has to do with that. Bringing people into your home means that you have a willingness to actually share who you are and actually share your life and actually let them in to see how things function within your life. There are a lot of people that are sort of private about what goes on in their house or behind closed doors and things like that. But what is the purpose of shepherds? What is their goal? Is to equip others. And what we looked at last week was that they are those who have matured in self-mastery to the extent that they're helping others with self-mastery. They're helping others with spiritual maturity. And the only really way that that happens is within relationships, within connections, face-to-face, within mentoring relationships. And so hospitality is this special thing that shows someone's willingness to sacrifice the facade. It is a willingness to take on a life of transparency. And a life of transparency is so vital because what happens with a transparent life is, number one, you see them for who they really are. There's nothing to hide. And I've known many elders through my life who have said that that's a terrifying thing, to have a transparent life. But it's only through a transparent life that an elder or a shepherd is truly able to connect with someone in an authentic way. And what I mean by that is only by a transparent life where the motives are seen, where even the weaknesses are seen, but especially the way of life, the lifestyle, the wisdom is also there on display so that someone looks at someone, they say, wow, they're not perfect, but wow, look at how much they have it together. Look at their marriage. Look at their relationship with their children. Look at their study habits and the way that they talk about spiritual things in their home. Oh, I didn't know that they struggled with this and that sometimes this is something that comes up. Because I struggle with that too. But they've made a lot more progress with that than me. You don't have any of that without transparency. And hospitality is all about that. It's about loving someone enough to be able to take the facade away and to say, this is who I am, and I'm making my whole life bare to you because I want to help you be who you need to be spiritually. And I have totally deviated from my notes, but that's okay. Authenticity is what is the goal. Because when authenticity is established, as far as pure motives, not a Not the facade or lie that this is a perfect person, but you're actually seeing the authentic person. When the authenticity is established, or you might even say when it's proven, that's when trust is actually earned. And when trust is earned, that's when, in other words, when they see that a shepherd is vulnerable, when they see this transparency, this is when they themselves will let the facade down. And that really is the hardest part. That's the key here. The example of transparency and hospitality from shepherds is them setting an example of what others should do. What those in the congregation, it's setting the culture for a congregation. We have a culture of transparency. None of us is perfect. We all have struggles. We're here to help each other. Here, I'm going to show you how to do it. I would say most people are skeptical of those who are in leadership positions. What is your motive? Are you really a hypocrite? Are you a big phony? Oh, you're not. Oh, you've proven that to me. Oh, you're someone that can actually bless me. Okay, well, I'm going to let the facade down. And when the facade comes down, that's when, and really only when, intimacy is achieved. And only when intimacy is achieved is true and deep and significant and profound influence achieved. Elders who act like they have it all together and they are perfect and look at my perfect life, those are people that can be emulated from afar, but there's always some fear or suspect that this isn't all that it adds up. It's not all that is on the facade, you might say. What's really going on inside? And so just the whole idea of bringing someone in your home to really see, and not just let's all fix our hair and put on our makeup and whatever for a 1-hour dinner. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about sharing life. Sharing life. And so think about it like this. When you think about the shaking people out the building, so to speak, and this is the only time that any of us see each other, that's just a travesty. When an elder is positioning himself, say, at a sterile distance, then what that does is it robs them and it robs everyone else of opportunities to share needs, to share problems, to share things that are stressing them out, to ask them questions, to come to them and confess sin and ask for help with sin. And we run the risk of that with our typical assembly structure. That's why the idea of hospitality and a culture that flows from that priority is one that goes beyond whatever is just happening here. It may involve time here in this place, but it goes beyond that. You know, as I mentioned in our last meeting, we are seeking to purpose ourselves to make ourselves available just here. Because we are here. This is a good place. This is a great time and opportunity because we're already together. But most of the times we don't seize this opportunity. We are too anxious to go to a Luby's that isn't even open anymore, right? And so hospitality goes hand in hand with another thing, and that's availability. Availability is a vital thing. I know of many godly men who would be really good shepherds who have decided not to be. I'm not talking about here in particular, but people that I really look to, they're doing great things for the kingdom, but they've decided not to be elders because they have a job that requires them to travel so much that they aren't available. And if someone is not available, then quite simply, they are not a shepherd. It isn't that if they're not available, they're not able to shepherd. It's availability and shepherding someone goes hand in hand. If you're absent, then you, by definition, are not shepherding. And so when you think about this sort of dilemma that some people fall into, as far as wanting to do so much, but then having responsibilities that are good and righteous responsibilities. Traveling while you work, that's a great responsibility to care for your family. Spending time with your kids and your wife, things of that sort. Those are good and noble and righteous things. And so it is imperative that when you're looking at just this grand theme of hospitality or being hospitable, the prioritization of time and availability are some vital things. But this goes back to our lesson about the purpose of elders and the purpose of deacons. Facilitating the time and availability of shepherds is the exact reason why deacons exist. And it's important for us to all think of that in that way, to understand who elders are, who deacons are. Deacons exist. You go back to Acts chapter 6. They exist so that elders are able to have the time and availability. And sometimes it's mental availability. Sometimes it's emotional availability. And let me explain. There is what you call the micro shepherding, and that's the face-to-face, the one-on-one shepherding. It's very important. That's really where influence happens. That's where mentoring happens. That's where spiritual transformation happens. There's also a macro shepherding, and it's this idea that there are particular ways of doing things, policies, decisions, things that shepherds need to do that are vital for shepherding. Without these, then they're also falling down on their duty. But the primary focus has to be the micro. And deacons exist in order to alleviate the burden, psychological, emotional, time restraints of that macro shepherding, that macro holding everything together. The deacons take that burden so that shepherds truly have an availability. And see, this is something that everyone in the congregation has to be on board with. For example, let's say that someone wants to take all of these pews and take them to the dump and get some chairs in here. Let's say that someone is really itching to do that. And they want to make that known to someone, right, who is in a position to do that. Who should they go to? Who should they pester? Who should they, time and time again, bring that up to so that that person has the thought and the weight and the responsibility of doing some research and looking into that idea, and who should they go to? Well, most of the times people go to the elders because the elders, they have the ultimate oversight of everything. But when everyone is on board with this cultural structure of the deacons exist for the explicit purpose of facilitating the availability of the shepherds, then what that means is that we're going to have a healthy understanding of who particular things need to be taken to. That's why this is so vital. There are so many things that shepherds stress out about that they should never even have heard about. Maybe at one point they are made privy to something that's going on. They give some oversight to it, but most of the time they don't need to know. And let me take this one step further and say this. I don't know if I'm going to do a lesson on the qualifications of deacons. Maybe I will. But think about it like this. Deacons are selected because they are trustworthy, which means that elders do not have to sign off on everything that deacons do. It just simply is not the case. If elders have to sign off on everything that deacons do, then either one of two things is true. Either the elders are too focused on micromanaging the macro part of their shepherding duties, or the deacons aren't trustworthy or not competent. One thing I know about the deacons that have been selected here is that they're trustworthy and they're competent, which means that when something is delegated to them, that they should be able to make decisions, and the elders don't need to sign off on it necessarily because they've entrusted it to someone who is trustworthy. You refer back to Acts chapter 6. But I digress from that. What we're talking about is the facilitating and the availability for face-to-face interaction. Face-to-face interaction is the only time when intimate knowledge is going to go two ways between the one who is seeking to lead and the one who is in need of being led. Relationships, they're the primary context within which shepherding occurs. Shepherding doesn't happen long distance. It doesn't happen from an arm's length. It doesn't happen through policies and through making sure the deacons are doing what they're supposed to be doing. It happens in homes. It happens across dinner tables. It happens at early morning coffee. It happens taking a walk around the non-existent track back here that we're going to build one day. We're going to get it, Bill. We're going to get it one day. That's where it happens. That's where real shepherding happens. Shepherding doesn't happen from standing here and proclaiming things. That's not shepherding. Hospitality is important for another reason. Not just shepherding individual needs. When you have people into your home, you know what they tend to do? They tend to run their mouth. And that's not a bad thing. Because a lot of times elders are out of touch. Sort of like politicians. They don't really know what's going on. They don't know the pulse of, how do people feel about this? And there are certain things that if elders aren't careful and listening, there are, you might say, negative bandwagons that people will jump on that will undermine the influence of the elders. And so having people into their home so that they can have different perspectives of how things are going in the congregation, because elders don't know everything. Elders aren't perfect. Having people in and having those various perspectives helps them to get the pulse of how people are doing so that they can make better macro decisions. And so while the face-to-face is the key, there are things that they will learn that help them to make better decisions in the broader sense, or what you might say in setting the culture. What are some cultural tweaks we need to make in the direction of where we're going? And so what goes hand in hand with hospitality is not just the having of someone into your house. The principle is greater than that. It's about sharing life with someone. It's about inviting them behind the facade, which means that hospitality is about actively pursuing settings, events, routines that are purposed for sharing life as a whole, as a culture for our congregation. Like the non-existent fellowship meals that we haven't had for a year. It's a travesty. We may think, we'll eat and we hang out and we whatever, but those have an intrinsic value. And we miss out without those. When we have the the barbecue out here under the trees. We spend time together. I've always been impressed with, BC built a new house, and he just purposed it to have people there and for the glory of God. And he sets a great example in that way. And so it's not just about having people into your home, but it may be about a routine of smaller meetings of groups with people. It can be very difficult to get to know people in a larger setting. And the larger a congregation gets, the more difficult it gets, and the more locked down to certain routines and settings it's important. It's important to have smaller settings, and I know some people have some negative feelings about the idea of small groups, but all I really mean by that is to have a dozen people or so in a home where you have some time to study the Word of God, to discuss spiritual things, to enjoy some food together, to share life with each other, to let down the facade with each other. And so sometimes it's not a one-on-one thing. Sometimes this intimacy can be fostered and developed in just these smaller settings. I know of people who are much more likely to open up in a smaller group, to really be vulnerable, and to really build not just relationships with the elders there, but with each other. Because it's not just about the elders and relationships with people, it's about a culture of relationships with each other. And so that's why we need to get back in the custom of these, to have different types of retreats. Men, women, young people, things like that. It's why we go to lectureships, and I think I heard, I don't know if PTP's been canceled again, I don't know. But it's the reason we go to things like that. It's the reason that we go on campaigns and on mission trips. Not the only reason, but it's within those particular areas. It's where we go door knocking, where we have these times where we really connect with people, where we're really sharing ministry with one another, and we're sharing life with one another, that we can have a positive influence on one another. In the course of my research, I came across a study that was very telling. And it wasn't a study of one particular congregation or two congregations. It was a study of many people who had left a congregation and gone to a congregation. Not two in particular, just a lot of people who had left one place and gone to another place. And they surveyed these people. And they asked them, well, what made you leave that place? What attracted you to this place as far as congregations go? 74% of them said that the hospitality that they experienced in the receiving congregation was one of the most significant deciding factors. In other words, when they were at a place where they did not feel like anyone wanted to share a life with them, then they weren't getting what they needed spiritually. And when they were able to go somewhere where people wanted to welcome them into their homes, and not just that, but welcome them into their lives in an authentic way, then they were experiencing some filling of spiritual voids that they had. Which goes back to one of these principles that we looked at in the shepherd model, which is that when shepherds are not feeding the sheep what they need, then they'll go find another place to eat. And that sheep will follow shepherds that feed them what they need. This principle is an ancient principle. And at its heart, this principle is framed in this way. What you are willing to sacrifice to help someone with, the way that you're willing to sacrifice for them and to help them, shows what you are willing to do for God. Very specifically, that's what it is. Hospitality is being able to sacrifice of yourself as far as giving the needs to someone that they need, caring for their soul, seeking to equip them so that they have the full expectation of hope of eternal life because you have helped them with their spiritual faithfulness. That your willingness to help them shows how much you're willing to help God. In Hebrews 13:2, the Hebrew writer says this, referring back to Abraham and Sarah. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. They didn't even know. In another place, in Matthew 25, where Jesus talks about the Son of Man coming in his glory and separating the sheep from the goats, here's the way he describes it. Starting in Matthew 25, starting in verse 34, the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." This willingness to sacrifice, to care for others, and one that's singled out is to take care of people. Take people in to your life. He says, well, that shows your willingness to take me into your life. Isn't that an interesting way to think about it? It all goes back to treat everyone like it's Jesus who's standing in front of you. That's really what it amounts to. Not that we need to help Jesus in some spiritual way, but how would we treat him if he were here? We see how a lot of people treated him in his ministry. Some negative, and some they sat at his feet. They invited him in. There are so many instances when you read through the gospel accounts of Christ that where people would have him into their home. And sometimes it was people that his opponents would say, "Why are you spending time with those people?" Because Jesus understood that influence and transformation happens face to face. It happens in relationships. The gospel is intended to go within the context of relationships. Yes, you can hear the gospel from someone that you don't know. You can believe it. You can be saved. Most of the time, influence in a spiritual way happens when the person that is speaking the gospel is someone that you know is not a hypocrite and not a phony, and they're authentic. And you know what? I think this gospel thing is something that I can get on board with because I see someone who's living it out in front of me. Influence, in particular with the gospel, happens within the context of relationships. Jesus knew that. There are a bunch of passages that I cut out of this lesson that are about Paul and all the different times when Paul and other of the apostles were welcomed into people's homes because they actually needed help. And sometimes Paul was all alone, and it was a big deal for people to take care of him. And so where do we stand today as far as how we do things around here? What is our culture when it comes to the desire to truly share life with one another? That's when we're able to equip each other, and in particular, that's when shepherds are able to effect spiritual formation and to look out for the souls of those with whom they've been charged. And so when thinking in the context of Matthew 25, how are we showing our love for Christ by how we show our love for others? I want to tell you this, that if you're not a Christian, then you are a stranger of God. But God is a lover of strangers. Jesus talked about how he wanted He wanted to come in, and He and the Father would make their home with you. If you're not a Christian, then you are a stranger separated from God by your sin. But by the blood of Christ, you can be brought near to God. You can have Him come and make His home with you. To borrow from John, Jesus stands at the door and knocks. He wants to come in. Will you share life with Him? If you believe He's the Son of God and that His blood can wash away your sins, that He died for you, if you'll recognize Him as Lord and confess Him in that way, submitting yourself to Him so that He can truly come in and transform your life, if you'll submit to being baptized in water where you can experience the new birth because you have been united with His death and His burial and His resurrection so that you can walk that new life, then you can enter into that beautiful picture that we find in Psalm 23 and that we find in John 10 of the shepherd, the good shepherd, laying down his life for the sheep, giving the abundant life for the sheep, saving the sheep, feeding the sheep, leading the sheep down a path of righteousness. But maybe you need to open up your life right now. Maybe you need to share life with your family here. And maybe it's something that you don't feel comfortable sharing with the group and you want to share with someone individually. Do not pass up the blessing of what we have to offer each other in helping us persevere in our faithfulness. God did not intend us to go it alone. Do not think that you as a Christian can be an island to yourself and that you will be able to succeed and persevere easily. It's not. It's even difficult when you have help. And with that, I'll stop. Randy has a song of encouragement, a song of invitation. Jesus invites you to come to Him. If you have a need that you want to make known, if you want to become a Christian, you can make that known right now while we sing this song. If you'll stand, let's sing.